Welcome to this, our latest webinar through the George Washington University Law School's Government Procurement Law program. I'm Chris Eukins. I'm a professor of government procurement law in the program here, and I want to welcome you to this webinar series that we've been very proud to host with folks who've joined from around the world. Today, we'll be joining a very distinguished panel to discuss an interesting development in the global public procurement community, the emergence of global government procurement council, who represent organizations and companies in public procurement markets worldwide. I should note that we have registrations today from 46 countries and 5 continents around the world, truly an international assembly. Thank you all for joining us today. Our panelists today all bring unique perspectives on the global practice of public procurement law. Christina Arcara is the Chief Audit Executive for Battelle, and she previously served as a Global Procurement Counsel for Battelle. At major technology centers and national laboratories around the world, Battelle conducts research and development, designs and manufactures products, and delivers critical services for government and commercial customers. Christina previously also served as counsel at Northrop Grumman, and she's a vice chair with Johanna Schnitzer and me in the ABA Public Contract Law Section's International Procurement Committee. Benedetta Audia is a partner and chair of the International Development Practice at DLA Piper. DLA Piper has what is probably the largest public procurement law group in the world. Benedetta teaches at GW Law School, Fordham University, and Luis in Rome. She's a former UNOPS counsel. Benedetta is one of the world's leading voices on international procurement and development. We are very privileged to have us here with us today. Kevin Dent of Ingleside Consulting has decades of experience in global defense transactions, including with Raytheon and Baker Botts. He has extensive experience structuring and negotiating commercial sales and offset transactions with non-U.S. government customers in the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. He's also a law school classmate of mine, and on a personal note, I'm very grateful he could join us. Johanna Schnitzer joins us from McKinsey & Company, where he is Managing Counsel in Global Public Procurement. Managing Counsel Global Public Sector. Johannes previously served as outside counsel and was the founder of a public procurement law firm in Vienna. He and I recently co-authored a McKinsey blog entry on the need to professionalize global public procurement counsel. That blog entry is linked on the program page for the session at publicprocurementinternational.com. Johannes and I worked together for many years on United Nations and anti-corruption initiatives, and he's done truly extraordinary work at McKinsey. He joins us today from Vienna. Anne Straval-Schmidt has extensive experience as in-house counsel working on international issues. She will discuss her academic study of global public procurement counsel, which is also posted on the program page at publicprocurementinternational.com. Annie recently graduated from our program at GW Law, and we are enormously proud to announce that she has joined Northrop Grumman as counsel there. She joins us from an undisclosed location in New Mexico? Eric Yo of the Boston Consulting Group serves as a global public sector lead for the legal team at Boston Consulting Group and leads the global public sector risk and contracts management team. In these roles, he works closely with our managing directors and partners, general counsel, chief risk officer, and other senior leaders to manage risk and to drive growth as Boston Consulting Group partners with leaders in business and government. He also serves as a career manager for team members in the United Kingdom, Japan, India, Australia, and the United States. He previously served as in-house counsel for Booz Allen and IBM. He was in private practice with me at the international law firm of Holland & Knight. Our panelists' bios are all linked on our program page at publicprocurementinternational.com. A quick note on our upcoming summer series. In the last 2 weeks of July, we'll be hosting a 4-week session a 4-session series on emerging issues in state procurement law here in the United States as part of an ongoing effort to update the American Bar Association's Model Procurement Code. Again, that will be on during the last 2 weeks of July. Information on those sessions will be available tomorrow on publicprocurementinternational.com. Today, we'll be discussing 5 different topics. So first, we'll be discussing career pathways for global public procurement counsel. Then we'll be talking about transnational lawyering. The third topic will be building an in-house group. The fourth will be on building capacity among government procurement counsel. And then the fifth topic, a very difficult topic, is how to overcome cultural barriers. At the conclusion, we'll be allowing time for audience Q&A. Please feel free to ask questions as we go in the Q&A. Now let's go ahead and start our session. So as I noted, our first session will be, our first discussion point in our session today will be on career pathways. And so let me ask you, let me start off first asking to the group, and especially focusing on Annie, who wrote a paper on this in the LLM program. And that paper is available again on publicprocurementinternational.com. What are some of the traditional routes to becoming in-house legal counsel, and becoming an attorney with specialization in this area? Annie, do you want to?
What I have found through experience and research is most people start out in a law firm or in the government and don't generally go directly from law school into an in-house position. Having government experience or law firm experience teaches you how to practice, being a lawyer without necessarily a specialty, but basically how to research, how to write emails, how to talk to partners, how to talk to business people, and how to prioritize your time, which is assumed when you come in-house. So I think some of the pathways would be any kind of law firm experience or government experience. And when it's U.S. government contracting, obviously, going in-house in a government procurement aspect, law firm in a government procurement aspect or with the government. But I think usually the pathway is either having practiced outside of an in-house situation. I can't hear you.
Chris, you muted.
Chris, you're muted.
So, Kevin, let me ask you, Kevin. Kevin, you have a slightly different pathway where you spent many years both in private practice and in Raytheon. What are your perspectives on the pathways to becoming a global government procurement counsel?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and I agree with Annie. The path I'm most familiar with, I was at Raytheon for about 10 years after being at a law firm for maybe 25 years. And the general counsel, when I joined, would actually only hire people with significant experience. So it was not an entry level or even a mid-level position when I joined. The folks who would join would generally 20 years plus of experience before they would take them in. It's changed a little bit under subsequent general counsels, but entry level, I wouldn't recommend to anybody asking me, to go in-house entry level. I think that you don't really have the training yet or the skill yet. The law firm route is kind of a well-established route. The government experience, for defense industry, that's pretty key to know how the U.S. government works, for example, the licensing issues and things like that. So that's a great background as well, though I think most of those folks generally do the law firm route for some number of years, then go going into the government, with state or something like that and move from there. But I do think you get training and experience at a law firm that it's hard to kind of get in-house. And so I think that's very valuable to do that. I don't know that they need to be a law firm for 25 years like I was before going in. That's just kind of the way my path worked. But I think that the training you get at a law firm is pretty key. Another thing I'll mention, and this may be relevant to a later question, but while we're talking about it, is I think being in-house is much more of a generalist position. I think a success at a law firm is often being narrow and deep. A particular topic, and you do the same thing every day and you're really, really good at it. The in-house experience, it's much of a, you're broader, and not to say you're supposed to be an expert at all things, but you're kind of supposed to be able to manage all things. And sometimes you have colleagues in-house who are experts on privacy law, something like that, and tap into them. But I think the successful in-house lawyers, particularly on the transactional side, tend to have kind of be broader rather than a narrow and deep.
So Christina, I'll ask you the hardest question. What is it that you wish you knew before you started working in a global public procurement environment?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Many things, but I'll try to I'll try to narrow it down. I didn't think it would be as hard to get management buy-in to a reasonable plan for laying out what the team needed for the international procurement negotiations, the people that needed to be on the team, the money necessary, to send folks in person to have negotiations, which is typically what is necessary for most jurisdictions with very large procurements. outside the US, a lot of that is done face-to-face, getting the team prepped, perhaps with a little bit of cultural training before the team left. And that was, somewhat, I think that setting expectations of management up front was a skill that I had to learn, that I wish somebody would have told me you needed to start there before you did anything else.
And for Johannes and for Eric, you're in unique positions now where you are working as global procurement counsel for your respective organizations. Are there downsides to being a global procurement counsel? Is there special difficulties that you've encountered in being a global counsel?
Eric, do you want to go first, Jeremy?
Calls at odd hours, Chris? Is that a practical answer? No, I think we all knew that that'd be part of the role when we took it on. It's actually a very fun part of the role, getting to work with colleagues in different parts of the world. I was just thinking about your pathways question, Chris, and just wanted to offer a few thoughts, perhaps to some of your students that are on the call, just thinking about that path to finding in-house roles in the future. And whether you're starting at a law firm or in government work, I think investing in yourself to build that expertise in public procurement, and even more so understanding the spectrum of laws, rules, regulations, manuals, guides, sort of that framework of what might apply to a specific transaction, can then be applied in other regions of the world. And so I certainly learned from you, Chris, at Holland and Knight, but there's different paths to sort of building that expertise and learning what could possibly apply to these specific transactions, right? As in-house counsel, we're all looking to drive the business forward and help close transactions. But in order to do that while managing risk, you sort of have to have this understanding of, well, what could possibly be applicable here? Where else should I be looking for potential guardrails, rules, regulations, and sort of really building that experience of things that could apply to a specific issue, a specific matter, and then learning how those skills may be transferable as you think about career growth. It's just something I've been thinking about.
Johannes, if I could turn to you on and discuss some of the second topic, the challenges in transnational lawyering. What kind of challenges have you seen in dealing with different public procurement laws in multiple jurisdictions?
But the good thing is, in a lot of jurisdictions, public procurement laws are similar, because a lot of public procurement laws are either based on the WTO government procurement agreement, on the ancestral model law. So there are some similarities, which I think is good. The challenge is that in many jurisdictions, public procurement is extremely highly regulated. I think in the States, we have, 2,000 of pages of law and a lot of case law. And in other jurisdictions, there is basically no case law at all. So I think this is really interesting, how to navigate public procurement regimes with a different maturity. But also what Eric mentioned, a lot is based on international best procurement practice, on fundamental principles. So I think this is something really important to understand, principles in particular in the public procurement field around transparency, objectivity and decision-making, competition. And I think this gives you a good sense, actually, how to navigate different public procurement regimes.
Yeah, you worked with me on the UNCITRAL model procurement law, and for the first few years when we were negotiating that, I would bring with me the federal acquisition regulation, because I thought my job was to negotiate the American position, and then I realized after a while I was just slowing everything down with this 2,000-page document. So I actually started negotiating from the EU directives. I would bring the 50-page EU directives with me to the negotiation and negotiate from those. The Europeans were shocked. But since the best practices on both sides of the Atlantic were essentially the same, the legal structures are essentially the same. It made it much easier to come up with a uniform position because they were so alike. It was remarkable. Can you talk a little bit about the varying difference, and both for Giannis and the rest of the group, can you talk a little bit about the varying levels of legal maturity in different countries? How advanced are procurement laws in different countries? Does it vary dramatically?
Yeah, so I think as we discussed, I think the US is obviously very, very far ahead, a highly regulated legal framework. Then obviously the European Union because of the EU public procurement directives. So I think in the States, in Europe, highly sophisticated, comprehensive legal framework. And then in a couple of jurisdictions, I would say, like, I don't know, in the Middle East and in Asia, are less regulated. And then it also depends who is your client, if it's like a classic public sector entity or like a state-owned entities where a different legal regime applies. So those are the nuances. But again, what I wanted to explain earlier, so a lot of people always complain that everything is over-regulated. But sometimes actually it's good because then you know the rules and you know how to navigate. So sometimes it's even more difficult to navigate places where the maturity of the public procurement laws is not so high. But it depends. And again, we now discussed about public procurement, but our role is not only about public procurement. So we are like a public sector lawyers. So there are a lot of different legal regimes. It's export control, it's sanctions, it's foreign influence laws, it's anti-corruption. So it depends, but from, let's say, a pure government contracting perspective, I think European Union, US, very, very formalistic, highly regulated. And then it depends, but there might also be like, well, one or two countries in Africa, which also have extremely comprehensive public procurement law, which I was not aware of. So I think it always depends on a case-by-case basis.
Benedetta, one of the challenges we have in the United States is that and working on the model procurement code, which is a state and local procurement code. It's a model code for state and local. When we have these dialogues, Benedetta, in the United States, really the federal system, because the federal system has been developing since the Revolutionary War. It's over 200 years old. So it's a relatively mature and comprehensive system. But when we deal with state and local government, there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of hostility because there's a sense that Washington is dictating to the rest of the country. There's that kind of stress. You find the same sort of hostility in countries that have less mature systems. You say, well, this is the European solution or this is the American solution. How do you deal with that in when you're dealing with countries that are still developing, they're catching up with their procurement systems?
Thank you, Chris. What I find is critical is that there is a sense of ownership from the local authorities that are involved. And so it's very easy for an external party to impose a standard set of rules, but it's much more difficult, but much more effective to have the beneficiaries, the recipients, understand why certain regulations are important, and also so that they can be modified to suit their needs. That's the whole idea around technical assistance and the need to always have someone who can bring international experience, assist local governments, state governments to build a more mature system together. That has been my experience over the years at the United Nations as well as my current role. The whole concept of technical assistance in building capacity is critical to ensure success, so that it's not seen as, it's someone who's imposing regulations on entities without fully appreciating the local challenges. Because, as you rightly pointed out, Chris, the US system is mature, but it is fit for the environment where it applies. Taking the same and translating it, in Rwanda or in Botswana or in other jurisdictions without taking into consideration the nuances and the differences in the various industries and also the different cultural environments would be short-sighted in a way.
Yeah, as we were discussing before the session, my wife and I went to visit the Jesuit missions in where Uruguay and Brazil and Argentina come together. And those Jesuit missions were very successful in the 18th century before the Vatican pulled the Jesuits out, precisely because the Jesuits did what you're talking about, Benedetta. When they were working with the Guarani Indians, the Jesuits learned from the Indians at the same time as they were teaching them. The orders that followed, the Franciscans and the Dominicans, were not as successful because they spoke to the Indians, they spoke to the Guarani as opposed to exchanging. And so I think that's a very, very useful insight. Thank you. So I wanted to shift tack a little bit here and talk a little bit about upskilling and structuring an in-house department for global procurement markets, because you guys are on the cutting edge of that. Johannes, you spent several years in private practice with your own public procurement law boutique law firm before you joined McKinsey about 4 years ago. Can you tell us a little bit about how you helped McKinsey develop internal public procurement sector capacity?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to tackle this question from two perspectives. The one is around like hard skills, public procurement, subject matter expertise, and then maybe the second around soft skills and cultural fit. So what we discussed and what Anne mentioned, there are different ways to find skilled public procurement attorneys or contract specialists. Overall, it's not that easy to find folks with hands-on experience. So what we tried to do is we were looking either, as Anne pointed out, for attorneys working at law firms in public procurement departments, for government officials who have been conducting tender procedures, or for folks who have been in similar roles, which means already in-house counsel at other multinational companies involved in government contracting. So once more, not an easy task, especially it depends on the location, but if you find someone with some sort of past experience, that's already a good starting point. And then it's about upskilling. So what we did at McKinsey, we developed our own onboarding curriculum on a lot of topics on public procurement, what are different types of tender procedures, grounds of exclusion, foreign influence laws, structuring bidding entities, partnering arrangements, blah, blah, blah. So quite a comprehensive curriculum on top of other legal topics, which every lawyer who joins McKinsey Legal is actually experiencing, from limitation of liability to data privacy. So let's say quite a tailored onboarding program, which I think is interesting. I personally, I'm a big fan of learning on the job. So we hired actually very good lawyers, top lawyers and contract professionals. So we expect them to perform from the first day on and to bring the best to their situation. So learning on the job, I think, really important. When it comes to upskilling, I think what also has been proven to be quite successful is like global forums to discuss real life scenarios. So that really folks can learn from exchange lessons learned. We also have less formalized like coffee chats without an agenda, where people just come together and problem solve. So this is like the, let's say, the subject matter expertise bucket. And then what's also very important is soft skills and cultural fit. We just touched upon this recently. And Chris, as you said also, so I had my own law firm, and really moving from an outside counsel role to an inside counsel role it's really different. So forget drafting long legal memos. You need to be concise. You need to be to the point. And I think what's also really important, you need to understand that different folks communicate and process information differently. Like a McKinsey partner talks differently. They're using their own terminology. The same is true with the proposal folks, with our colleagues from risk, with our colleagues from finance or communication. So I think if you're moving into this in-house role, you need to have really an open mindset. You need to be able to listen. You need to be able to ask the right question at the right time. You need to be super concise and top down in your communication. So otherwise people are just not listening. It's everything here at McKinsey is 1, 2, 3, everything, which I think is fun. And also what for me personally has been proven to be quite useful is how folks problem solve here. There's like this framework, like situation, complication, resolution. That's like a problem solving framework. And I also use it, which helps me to come up with a good solution. But it also helps me speaking the same language like my clients. So I think this is really good. And then again, I already mentioned a couple of times, concise advice, ideally 3 options, pros and cons, so that folks can make an informed decision. More top down, doing all the thinking in the background. Again, not writing 20-page legal memos. No one will ever read it here. 1, 2, 3, that's it. Are you on mute, Chris?
Sorry, but then let me ask you the flip question, which is oftentimes when I'm conversing with, let's say my Italian colleagues will send an email this long, and the American predilection is to send an email that's this long, which is what Johannes is referring to. But I think, oh, I'm going to cause offense. I should be matching their oral styles. So I write very long emails, and then I actually would translate them into Italian using machine translation like DeepL and I send them both out. Am I doing the right thing culturally, offering trying to match the voice, and then also offering a machine translation when I send an email?
I would say yes, but with some caveats. They do understand that you have a different approach. And to be honest with you, I am Italian, but I like to write concise and succinct messages. So I'm not a good person to ask, because I do get these long emails, especially now from my colleagues at ELA Piper at the firm. But I don't. I don't modify my style necessarily just to suit that context. I'm a big fan of what Johannes was indicating. It's very important to be concise and to the point, especially when you're dealing with multiple, different matters.
As a mechanical matter, Benedetta, and most people have now emails that can automatically translate, but as a courtesy, oftentimes I'm offering a machine translation in the same email. I'm saying doing it in English and then offering a machine and I'm labeling it as a machine translation to cover obviously mistakes in the program I make. Do you do the same thing?
No. I often even just write back in English.
Okay.
Even for a second, just a quick thing. I mean, I was listening to Johannes, and I'm right. I think he's right. The succinct is better. One thing that struck me when I got to Raytheon, and I was not surprised at needing to be more concise, and you couldn't have 30-page, law school articles going around. At Raytheon, and I think this is at all, defense companies I'm familiar with, everything's PowerPoint. And lawyers don't necessarily gravitate toward PowerPoint. I mean, it's kind of, I thought it kind of gimmicky, right? And some people, but PowerPoint is how, if you're talking to any non-lawyer, that's the only way you're going to get anybody to look at something and respond. And it does tend to focus things. You get to bullet points. Lawyers are really bad about writing a PowerPoint with 250 words on a slide, right? And they're trying to, they take their memo and put it. That's the wrong approach. But it's definitely a skill to really just get to those bullet points. And the PowerPoint is not a bad thing it forces you into that structure that's what management's looking for, the people you're reporting to. And so plenty of times I would maybe do something, write it out in Word document, but then say, okay, I've got to turn this into something that people are actually going to review. And you send them a Word document, even a page or two long, like the likelihood of reading that is much less likely than sending them a 10-page PowerPoint. That's what at least at Raytheon, that's what everybody was geared toward. And you show up with a Word document, they looked at you like you had two heads on. So that was at least my experience.
But just a quick follow-up, we just asked to Kevin. So when you send someone a PowerPoint, this is a very interesting language form. So if you're sending someone as a PowerPoint as a way of communicating, are you signaling that you anticipate making a presentation, or are you just attaching the PowerPoint as a courtesy to say, look, I can think in these concise terms?
You might end up presenting, but like when I was briefing up to the general counsel on things, and he was an old school like powerhouse lawyer, but he got into this habit of sent him the PowerPoint, and you might, when you called him to talk through, you might refer to it But it's really just the way people communicate internally. They don't, and email's fine too, if that's shorter, but if you feel to me a little more formal in your presentation, the PowerPoint's the way to go. And it's, it's not like the one your kids do in high school with like exploding fireworks, right? You kind of, that's kind of gimmicky, but just keep it short and sweet. And if it's too many words or too long a PowerPoint, you're going to lose them as well. So you've got to, as lawyers, we tend to be a little verbose, I think. And the more you can limit it down and be succinct, it's been a more effective way to communicate.
Johannes?
That's one more thought. Being concise and to the point does not mean that you should not do all your thinking in the background. Obviously, you need to think everything through, but the message to the internal client needs to be to the point. So to Kevin's point, also we at this firm, we communicate in PowerPoint. This is what we do. But actually, you slim it down, and maybe it's just the executive summary, and then there's background information in the annex. So again, you need to do all the thinking, but options, pros and cons, ideally on one slide. This is how it works there.
Eric, I wanted to ask you, because you're in a unique role where you're also serving as a mentor for folks in other countries through Boston Consulting Group for colleagues in other countries. What are some of the key attributes that you see in counsel as they want to advance as in-house counsel? What are some of the key attributes that you see and that you want to nurture in them?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And before I answer that, let me just comment that I agree with everything that was just said about being concise and having options. The one add that I would offer is to also have a recommendation for the business, so that it's not just pros and cons, and I hope you guys make the best decision. It's actually coming to the table with a solution that you're recommending if you were in their role as a business leader, is something that I think is appreciated in all in-house roles. The mindset, Chris, that we embrace, I know others embrace, is a learning mindset here at BCG. And so when we're growing a team globally, and when I'm building relationships with both business colleagues and legal, risk, and contracts colleagues in other countries, it's very much based in building those relationships, wanting to learn more about their culture, their way of operating. And I've absolutely increased my awareness of what is going on in different parts of the world, and having that awareness of even simple things like holidays and whether certain countries work on a Friday is very much key to growing this global team and having that awareness and connectivity. There's also a really key attribute to wanting to share these best practices globally. I think we all can get caught up sort of in the day-to-day solutioning and dealing with the issue that's in front of us, but finding the time and making a priority to lift up and then share those learnings, share those success stories, and share those failures when they happen, so that the institution can learn from those instances, is something that we're trying to do more and more of, and it's been very well received.
All right, do you do that on a regional basis, or do you do it on a country-by-country basis?
Both. So I will have, for example, standing meetings with the UK team, the India team, other regions of the world, spending more time in Southeast Asia as those markets are just continuing to grow. But then we absolutely lift up to make sure that those learnings, those trends, and different approaches are being shared globally amongst the team.
Christine, in terms of the special skills required and some of the special challenges in a global practice, when you, as a guest to a very kind guest to our classes, when you joined us, we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that women face in working internationally. Could you talk a little bit about those challenges and how you've addressed them?
Sure. So I think, well, for anyone who is, going to be traveling internationally and negotiating contracts, you need to be prepared, right? So, you know, you need your subject matter preparedness, but also your cultural preparedness. And, you know, as a woman, you know, I think I have been extremely lucky in my career. I, you know, have been to some interesting places and, you know, have been met with nothing but kindness and graciousness and gracious hosts. And so I've had a very positive experience. But I do, you know, I don't think all of that's luck. Again, being prepared, understanding the cultural norms, what's okay, what's not okay, and following that has, you know, added to that success. And I would reach out to your network if you're going to be traveling someplace you've never been. Reach out to people in your legal network, your family network, to see if they've been there. Reach out to trusted local counsel if you, which I always recommend as well, somebody on the ground who knows the unwritten rules of the road, and just, you know, study and be prepared and have a backup plan, a plan A, B, and C for while you are, you know, in country, and you'll be fine.
I have to say, as a professor, where by definition, Christine, I travel on, so and without very little protection. I've actually been robbed 5 times working abroad, and I can walk across Manhattan in the middle of the night without any problem. Even in the rough neighborhoods, I do absolutely fine. But abroad, because as you say, it's very difficult to learn about the dangers of where you're going. I'm much more vulnerable, and that's how I've got robbed so many times. And as you say, you need to have a plan B on how you're going to deal with those security risks. Obviously, something I'm still developing, Christine. So I wanted to talk with the group a little bit about, and Johannes, start off with you about some of the challenges in building capacity in your in-house groups that are working internationally. What are some of the special challenges in building capacity in such a diverse group that you have at McKinsey around the world?
Good question. So, and obviously it's about finding the right talent. We discussed this. And then I would say a different, really important component is to find the right operating model. So I joined McKinsey 4 years ago, and I think we have more than doubled to 300 lawyers over the last 4 years. And the number of lawyers in the public sector actually have increased even more. So we also consider different operating models like dotted lines and solid lines and center of excellence. And I think that's very important to be able to put power on the pavements, so to say, because it's not sufficient just to have very talented lawyers. You need to have the right structure in place, so that first you can be prompt and swift in your advice. This is what we're here for. We discussed it earlier, but I think it's also very important for colleagues to understand what are their objectives, who ensures oversight, how career progression actually works, performance evaluation. So every member needs a home and needs to understand actually how internal processes work. So I think that's this combination of finding the right talent, upskilling talent, putting the right operating model in place. I think that's also a second very important component.
Kevin, did you want to comment on that, on how to upskill the in-house department?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to build on something Johannes said is, and I think someone else alluded to this earlier. One of the things that I found going in-house that I didn't anticipate, and frankly, it took me a while to get good at it. Maybe I'm still not as good at it as I should be. But we're at a law firm. If you're tasked by a client to go do something, go take that hill in the military parlance, like you got the decision's been made, you go do what you're supposed to do. You keep the client informed, and you try to reach that goal. Internally, there are lots of stakeholders, and lots of folks have views on things, and lots of folks have to approve things to get there. So you might think you're going to go do this, negotiate for this contract, but the HR folks have a view on it, and the internal tax folks and everything else. And so there's a lot of internal management you have to do. And it sounds sort of obvious once you're in there, but it was something that was, I was, as you take the hill now, you have to kind of really make sure everybody else is on board with you going up that hill, and you have to go back and check, and you're going to have some folks who are stakeholders, who are approvers, who they're not so keen on that hill, right? And they're not so keen on that contract. And so you've got to kind of, and they may be actively opposed to it. More likely, if the company wants you to go that way, they're not actively, but they've got to be managed and all that. So a lot of it is relationship building and collaboration. I know those sort of buzzwords, and people collaborate, everybody collaborates, but it's a pretty key on the in-house role to do that. And that things take a lot more time, right? You think you're gonna spend 95% of your time negotiating with the foreign government on the DCS contract, for example. But I spent a lot of time just managing people internally, not managing, that's wrong with it, working with people internally, making sure they were informed, making sure their concerns were addressed. And sometimes getting a lot of people on a call to work through, this guy wanted X and this lady wanted Y, and you've got to they're different. So I think that's kind of a key skill set that you need to develop, that I don't know that lawyers coming out of law firms are great at that always. They're kind of just used to like take the hill. So I think that's something that is an important skill set to learn. And I think the team you have in-house, if they don't have that skill set, you're not going to be successful. And what happens then is the business guys start to ignore you. If you're not kind of reading the tea leaves properly, they don't want to bring you around and bring you on board. And the sooner you get on board, the better, because you have then the ability as the lawyer to structure where you're going and avoid going down paths that are not optimal from a legal perspective. And you become a value add there rather than someone that they try to not invite into the room. And you want to be in the room.
But Eric, I wanted to ask you a practical question on the skills, on the capacity building. How do you, across Boston Consulting Group, how do you get the word out? Like, for example, the United States now, holy cow, the United States is going to require contractors to disclose the greenhouse gas emissions that are attributable to the products or services that they're selling to the government. How do you get word out across your company on these major developments so that everybody stays sort of up to speed with the emerging best practices?
Yeah, good question, Chris. And Kevin, thanks for the great thoughts on sort of the in-house socialization journey when it comes to getting all the internal buy-in. That certainly resonates. Good question, Chris, about just sort of the awareness and the buy-in and building compliance plans around new developments. We have a team that is tracking those developments, meeting regularly to make sure that we're prioritizing where investments may need to be made and which stakeholders across the business, both within our business services team, and then to the extent that we need other stakeholders to be involved in those decisions, and sort of the plan going forward is something that we're doing pretty frequently.
I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I touched on briefly with Christina before, some of the cultural barriers that you encounter. So one of the first and most obvious, and Johannes, if you could talk about this a little bit, is the question of diversity. That having having a very diverse team, do you see that as a strength, and how do you convey the importance of that strength if you do?
Yeah, I can, absolutely a strength. So I don't have numbers here, but the legal department is extremely diverse, and also the members of the global public sector legal team. And I think, you really need to take this diversity as an advantage, and really embrace it, because regulatory frameworks, we talked about it, very complex. Tender procedures are also getting really, really complex. So you need, smart people around who problem solve together. And it might be, and hopefully, someone who is sitting in Japan or in Colombia is way smarter than I am. And if we put our heads together, we come up with a better solution. And it's not only about how skilled a lawyer is, I think, or a contract professional. It's also folks from different cultures approach problems differently. And you can only see this as a strength. And I'm extremely fortunate that the legal department here at McKinsey is extremely diverse. And what I also just mentioned, we have lawyers, obviously, in the legal department, but we also have like contract professionals with a different background. So it's not only about diversity from a cultural perspective, but also from an educational one. And I can't see any model which could work better than bringing different people together to problem solve together.
Benedetta, did you have a comment?
I do, Chris. I just wanted to echo what Ioannis was saying and just again reemphasize that diversity is not just a strength, but it's an absolute requirement these days. Many clients will not even, take us seriously, honestly, if we don't approach them, if we don't come up with a team that is diverse. In terms of, it has to have a good balance, not just in terms of, from a gender perspective, but just in general, taking into account different cultural backgrounds, different perspectives. I do also agree with Ioannis on the point that he made about, there are different ways to solve legal challenges, and you having different views in the room is important. Let's also remember that we are, we cover the globe. We are procurement professionals that work in an international environment. We're not talking about, a local in settings, but now even in local settings, diversity is critical. So it's just a must these days. The point about subject matter expertise is also critical. DLA Piper has a very similar setup. There are more than 10,000 people who work at the firm, but many of the employees of the firm are engineers, data scientists, physicians, researchers. We have the full, suite of technical experts, just because of the nature of and the complexity of the matters that we are asked to address.
For our international audience, to put some of the American discussion of this into context, there's a very important case pending before our Supreme Court, where decision is expected shortly, where the Supreme Court will be addressing affirmative action at Harvard and other universities. And it's expected that the court will say that race-based preferences are not sustainable here in the United States. And the anticipation is that will affect public diversity efforts, state sponsors attempts to require diversity. So a lot of the discussion of diversity that you're hearing here today is management, corporations, private and public organizations sorting out ahead of time how they'll deal with diversity in an environment where it may not be legally required, but it would be from a management perspective, it would be imperative. Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about your work and how diversity plays a role in Boston Consulting Group?
Yeah, happy to, Chris. And coincidentally, my call just before this one was with the BCG D&I at Legal team, which we're now calling DIAL, which is both a global team, and then we have regional teams that are focusing on this topic. And it's such an important area of focus for us as a team, as a firm, and I know for everyone. And there's a couple of different things that we're focusing on right now. Number one is really embracing the diversity of the existing team that we have. We have an incredibly diverse team here in North America and globally, and making sure that we have that safe space, that we are embracing the diversity that we have across all cohorts, all levels, in all parts of the world is super important. There's also an important focus on how we're thinking about diversity in hiring and making sure that we're looking at a diverse slate of candidates, that we're not going to sort of the assumed sources for candidates and even where we should be posting those open recs. And then Benedetta, you raised a really important point about the importance of diversity in not just which firms you're hiring, but the panel of lawyers that they're offering for our services to make sure that we're continuing to provide those opportunities and get the benefit of, as Johanna said, that diverse thinking and different ways of approaching topics. And then the last thing that we've been challenging ourselves to do is to keep sharing very practical experiences and examples of either where D&I has been celebrated, has been successful, and is more embedded into the way that we're working and carrying on our daily lives. And also where there's opportunities for growth and where there's opportunities to do more on the topic. Because I think we all know there's much more to do. We want to keep making sure that we're focused on those very practical real world examples and not just talking about it as an important topic at a high level is some of the focus that we have right now, Chris.
Thanks, Eric. I wanted to ask the panel, and Christina, you may have practical experience that you can shed on this. There was a question from the audience from Najib Kabuchi. He asked, can you please talk about the translation of contract clauses, challenges, especially when there's a conflict that might require judicial intervention. How do you deal with that issue of when you go from an English language clause, say, to a foreign language clause, or vice versa? How do you deal with those challenges in practice?
So I would recommend that, I always recommend getting local counsel involved in that a lawyer actually do the translation of the document if that is, if the native language is, required. And you cannot have the document that's signed be in English versus a local non-lawyer translator. I've actually oftentimes done both and done a little bit of a comparison, but spending that extra money to get that peace of mind that if a contract clause or the entire contract is challenged in the local jurisdiction and through the court system, that both parties understand at the outset what those clauses exactly mean and what the outcome is likely to be in front of that judge. And it goes back to my earlier comment that, really prepping your management for understanding what all of the costs are to a transaction and having that buy-in from them from the outset of all of the things that you need to be prepared for worst case scenario and a little, doing things correctly at the front end prevents a lot of expense on the back end.
Thanks. Kevin, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to beat the drum on what Christina said. I couldn't agree more that the money spent on translation in that scenario is key. We always obviously try to get the English language is the prevailing language in a contract. And often we did side by side. So we'd have English and Polish or whatever it might be. But in cases where we had to go with Polish language, I don't speak Polish, we would, the money spent on the translation it's the last place you want to be cheap and try to save a few dollars. What we'd often do is we had great translators internally. We'd have them do a translation, but then we'd send it to our local counsel and have them review it. And particularly clauses that were more substantive, the stuff that was really the key to the contract. I mean, I would sit down with local counsel and really say, now, here's what I think this says. And, you see, and having this side by side is helpful too, because then it helps that bilingual person, a bilingual lawyer in Poland to really understand what we're trying to get to on the English side. But that's a super key thing. And a lot of, we have arguments forever in negotiation where it says, you shall do this in English, and in Polish, they say, well, shall can mean this or that. Which one do you mean? And so it's tough. And I'm often scared in that situation because, of course, I can't read the Polish, right? And I can't make sense of that. And so getting a good local counsel who's been involved with the transaction, that's another thing. You just don't want to send it into some paralegal at a law firm who's never seen it before. But the guy who's been negotiating with you, then have that person, that lawyer, have him or her review the document. And that's really money incredibly well spent at the end of the day.
Thanks. But then I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you and ask for a little personal professional question. Well, what is your experience? You're one of the few lawyers out there who's experienced both in the United Nations organizations and now in private practice at DLA Piper. What's been the most striking for you in that transition from a UN organization to a major law firm?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. My personal reflection. So it was a bold choice. It was a very good one. Maybe I'll change my mind in a year or so. But as I said, as you said, actually, Chris, my choice is a unique one. You don't see many people leave the United Nations system. But I'm enjoying it, and I'm trying to set up a similar type of practice in terms of like coverage of geographic areas and also coverage of matters. So going beyond I don't know if it was Kevin who mentioned this before, being narrow and deep, but, try also to be, to have a broader coverage. What I'm trying to set up is a practice that can truly function as an effective bridge between the private sector and the UN, always with the goal in mind of ensuring that projects in the developing world can be implemented effectively. It is taking some time to also build internal capacity within the firm, because what was quite a broad area of expertise earlier at the UN, and the firm appears to be quite narrow. And so finding that balance is what makes this an exciting adventure.
Thank you very much, Benedetta. We got a great closing question from one of our guests. David asked, what do you think are the most pressing challenges in the future for global public sector counsel? And I'd like to close out with answers from all of you. Well, let's start with Christina. Christina, what do you think the most pressing challenges are for the future for counsel in this position?
I think there's going to be an explosion of new technologies that are deployed throughout the world. And so how do you procure for that where there's no precedent set? I mean, it's very easy to say, like, I'm selling a military system, right? A battle command system, but people know what that is. When you start to talk about like more nebulous technologies in the healthcare or environmental space, and there's no precedent set, I think that would keep me up at night personally. Is the contract going to cover everything it needs to cover in the event that things go south? So that, for me, keeping up on all of that and what is the norm and standard is, does keep me up at night.
Annie, what do you think based on your study? What's the biggest future challenge for this global public sector council?
I think it's a few things. I think it's technology in a different aspect, AI. I think depending on the level you come in, I think Kevin was saying a lot of people come in after many years. So looking at the fact that you're a procurement counsel, but if you're like in a general counsel, assistant general counsel role, I think you need to be able to spot a lot of different types of issues like geopolitical issues and the way the winds are moving, because that will impact your multinational corporations' bottom line and what risks they need to manage, like, the invasion of Ukraine. Different orders might happen because of what's happening geopolitically. So I think being aware of that, but that's on a higher level than just coming in as an entry position, procurement counsel, and the changes in sanctions and that sort of thing. I mean, being probably able to spot a lot more moving parts, like the supply chain changes that had happened through COVID. So I think that's going to become quicker and more intense, but that really is talking about global procurement general counsel or assistant general counsel level that has to kind of put all of these pieces together or spot those issues.
Thanks very much, Annie. Eric, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges for folks in your role?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And I guess I would also add just the pace of the way businesses are operating these days and the pace of change in geopolitics, change in regulations, change in laws, and just keeping current with everything that's going on that could impact our business. And I guess the way that we manage a lot of that risk is continuous communication amongst our team. We leverage Slack channels and other technology in-house to make sure that amongst a global team, everyone is keeping in touch real time. And then also making sure that we're leveraging all of the expertise that we have both internally and externally to help track developments, to help think proactively about how we may be approaching issues as they're developing. And then also to be making sure that we're looking around the corner, anticipating draft legislation, proposed legislation, changes in regulations, and what our options may look like and what the impact may be to sort of do that advanced planning to the best that we can, I think has been very helpful as we're thinking about the path forward.
Thanks, Eric. And Kevin, from your perspective, future challenges?
Yeah, I'm going to build on something that kind of Eric alluded to, but it's, this is not a new issue, but it's become a more acute issue. I think the lack of harmonization of legal regimes across the world that you have to be conscious of. And I'll use the example of sort of the privacy issue, right? That's, it used to be if you knew the US law and the EU law, you kind of had things covered on a lot of these issues. But now, lots of countries are passing, I'm using privacy as an example, these privacy laws that are very different. And it's very difficult for an organization to comply with all of them because they're all generally the same, but some are more strict and some things you can do here and can't do there. And it's really hard to keep your people in line as to what that's permitted to do because they're traveling between countries and what might be a permitted activity in country and in the US or even the EU might be something that runs afoul of a new privacy law in the Middle East or, in a country in the Middle East. So it's sort of overwhelming to try to keep up with that sometimes. And so you really just need to kind of be aware of that. I guess rely on local counsel when you go into a country, but none of us can be experts on all of that in all the countries. And even, we have great privacy people at Raytheon and he's not, as an example, but, and they had a pretty good feel for a lot of the big ones, but they couldn't be expert on privacy laws in, 100 different countries either. So you really need to go with your eyes open and know what the questions to ask and hopefully find a good local counsel to help you navigate some of that.
Benedetta, drawing both on your experience in the public sector and also now in the private sector, what do you see as some of the key challenges going forward for global public sector counsel?
The need to have a holistic approach to solving problems. It's very important to look at different areas, different angles, and really become that trusted advisor that can resolve matters, taking into account not just legal issues, but looking beyond those. Again, we shouldn't be focusing on specific areas in a vacuum. It has to be, we have to take into account the whole context and especially, financial issues. And if we talk about global procurement, the whole issue of financing is also important. So many other areas. So for us, global public sector lawyers, it's very important to be trained and build capacity in areas that go beyond what we necessarily feel comfortable with.
And Johannes, this program was very much your brainchild. So I want to close out with you. What do you see as a key future challenge for folks in this position?
Yeah, a couple of final reflections. McKinsey style, 1, 2, 3. I would say the first one is people. It's about finding people, attraction and attrition. So finding the right people and keeping them happy. The second one is like crisis management. It feels that, I don't know, we have been stuck in crises for the last couple of years, COVID, Ukraine, I think it's just crisis. This management is becoming the new normal. And the third reflection, reputation risk. Even if a company is acting fully in line with the law, public perception might be different. So people, crisis management, reputation, I think those are the three important issues to consider over the next couple of years.
Thanks. It's very helpful. We've gone a few minutes over. I wanted to thank all the panel for an excellent hour. Thank you very, very much for sharing your insights. Annie, thank you for sharing the paper. That was really helped lay the foundation for all of this. And again, for the broader audience, I hope you can join us in the second half of July for our discussion of reform of the model procurement code. Thanks again and have a great day. Bye-bye.